partner. Welcome to the Old West, which is actually about to be closed. So, in our other video, we talked about the closing of the West and how the frontier has officially been closed. And now we want to talk about how this affects the settlers, the indigenous people that we've already forced out there, and the end of the Plains Indians, because this is really when the end of Native Americans occurs as a culture, and we've really driven it at this point to decide that Native Americans are not going to be part of our country anymore, at least not in a way that makes them an American. They have to be American to be part of the country. They're not going to be allowed to be Native. So let's start. We ran down the other day about how things have changed over time. And by the time of the Civil War, we have all sorts of different things going on all over the country. And we want to look at what's happening with the Indian tribes during the Civil War, because there is stuff going on. There's not just the United States versus the Confederate States. There's also stuff going on past the Mississippi. So if we look at 1862, height of the Civil War, right? Civil War is at a stalemate, but things are going on other places. So up in Minnesota, a group of Sioux Indians is fighting against the encroachment of the European Americans. And again, we have already offered this land to them, and now we're taking it back. So they are being targeted for encroaching on the land that was already promised to other people. And so the European Americans who are moving to Minnesota, the Sioux attack, and about 400 settlers are killed. And in response to this, more white Americans come and they push the Sioux back, and they push the Sioux into the Dakotas. And this is going to spark a series of events that will be attacks on the different settlements further west and the stagecoach lines, because 1862, most of our railroad tracks are not running that far north. So there's still stagecoach lines, right? And there's going to be more attacks. In 1864, a couple of years later, we have a different situation where the Colorado militia, who's out on patrol, runs into a camp of Cheyenne and Arapaho who have been camped out near Fort Lyons. Now, Fort Lyons is a U.S. military fort, but the Cheyenne and the Arapaho have been given permission by the fort commander that they can camp there. And whether the Colorado militia knows this or not, the Colorado militia determines that they are encroaching on U.S. land, and so they open fire on the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. And they kill about 150 to 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho combined, which also, continuing on this Sioux versus the European Americans in Minnesota, pushes forward a new round of warfare on the Plains tribes, who are going to join forces to repel the white settlements that keep coming out into the land. So the attack on the Cheyenne and the Arapaho at Fort Lyons does have a name. It's called the Sand Creek Massacre. It is a massacre. The Cheyenne and the Arapaho are gathered at Sand Creek. They're there with permission. And the militia open fires, and they're not opening fire on warriors or aggressive tribal men. They are firing on everybody. So women and children are killed during this massacre just as much as the men are killed, which again makes it a massacre and not something that you could kind of push off and say, oh, it was like a mistake, right? So things are not going well. And again, we're going back on all of our promises. And then in 1866, right after the Civil War ends, the federal government decides that they need to build a road. We need a road, you guys. We just need it. And we need this road to connect our gold mining towns, right? We talked about how there's gold mining towns all over the place now. So we need to build a road so we can connect our gold mining towns throughout the state of Montana. And unfortunately, the road they want to build goes through the Sioux hunting grounds. So a Sioux warrior, Red Cloud, and his followers lead Captain Fetterman of the United States and his troops into an ambush, and they end up killing them all. And again, it sounds bad if you look at it like that, but you have to consider our continuities and change over time, right? And all of our context and all of the other things that have happened and the causes. It's kind of like John Brown. It's not as clear cut. They ambushed him because he had taken their land, and this was land that we had taken already and promised to them after we took other land. So, of course, the European Americans are outraged and they demand reform, right? We need reform for these savages now. We only call people who are not white savages. We never call white people savages. We will call them other things, but you will not hear that word referred to white Americans. So they need reforms, right? They're demanding reforms. And so they've got the United States Indian Peace Committee, who has decided, without any participation from actual Native Americans, I'm sure, that the only way to achieve peace is to once again resettle the Native Americans. And this time they're going to be resettled onto very specific lands. We are going to give them very enclosed lands and reservations, and we are going to force them to adapt to the European American white way of life. And if they don't, that's their problem and they're going to have to deal with it, right? So we create a set of treaties in 1867 called the Medicine Lodge Treaties. They are called the Medicine Lodge Treaties because they are signed at Medicine Lodge Creek in Kansas. Now, if you remember from Andrew Jackson and our Trail of Tears, the U.S. and their treaties with Native Americans are not usually fair and just treaties. This will be no different. So the first treaty is signed by the Kiowa and Comanche. The second is signed by the Plains Apache alongside the Kiowa Comanche. And the third treaty is negotiated with the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. The point of these three treaties, the point of these groups, is to get them to work with the United States. They're promised peace. They're promised protection from intruders. In return, all they have to give is friendship and relocation to the reservations in the Western Territory. We've heard this before, right? This is pretty much the exact same treaty that they forced on the Cherokee, the Treaty of New Echota, right? The treaties are also going to define reservation boundaries. They are going to define the role of an Indian agent and define the government obligation to the tribes. So the Indian agent, his job is going to oversee reservation affairs, including the construction of buildings, employee residence, and schoolhouses. But he's also an agent of civilizing measures that are going to be incorporated into the reservations and into the treaties. And I mean, that sounds like what's a civilizing measure? It civilizes you, right? He is also going to be responsible for the annuity goods that the reservations receive. These are things that they're going to get yearly to help maintain an agrarian economy. And one thing that comes up in this treaty, in the provisions, is that off-reservation bison hunting is restricted to only lands south of the Arkansas River. And if you remember when we introduced the native tribes, right? The Plains tribes, they use buffalo, they need the bison, and now they've been restricted to only hunting in a very small area. They also get rations on the reservation system, and they're not actually regulated. So there is no regulation, and then later on, they will not even get what they're supposed to get. And so in exchange for all of this, the tribes are supposed to end hostilities, and they're supposed to just take all of this and agree with it. They are also not supposed to interfere with the railroad construction and the military posts that are there. And an important note is that Article 12 of the treaties requires 3/4 of the adult male tribal population for future land secessions. And the Kiowa complains that a 1,900 acre allotment of reservation land without majority consent violates Article 12, which will result in a landmark Supreme Court decision called Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock in 1901. But we're not going to get into that right now. We will get into that later. Right now, we are going to continue on our tribal wars.